Thank you, Cameron, very much for the warm introduction. Tim and I have only been here less than 24 hours now. We arrived last night, and I've seen and met so many people already from industries, from so many industries all across AWS's sectors. It's been really wonderful to see what a breadth of customers there are, But the industry that Tim and I are from is education, and in some ways that's really the industry that unites us all. We've all been to school. We're all here this week to learn. And sometimes, we're called on ourselves to be educators, to our colleagues and our children. Just 24 hours ago, as I was about to say goodbye to my family, I sat down with my 3-year-old, took a globe off a shelf, and pointed to where Las Vegas was, because she didn't know. And, it was quite exciting to see her engage with, like, a real thing, a prop, and really start understanding that the world is round, and you can see on Google Maps, but you can't really understand the world is round until you hold something round in your hands. And through that, she really started to understand, why is she not eating breakfast at the same time I will be doing while I'm over here? There's something magical that happens when you get the right tool to educate. It really makes a message sing. And, you're going to be seeing a lot of talks at reInvent this week. Tim and I will too. And not many talks will have tools and props with them. We've been allowed to bring some stuff up here. We probably had 30 seconds to spare to get it working, so I'm really glad it is working. And we're super excited to show you that. But first, I just want to take you a little bit through about what is EF. So, education first. We're the world's largest private education company. We have a presence in 120 countries. And we have more than 600 schools and offices around the world. And we have more than 50,000 employees. And Tim and I are here today to talk about online education. But EF really has a presence in all sorts of education markets. We do gap year travel, we do au pair, we do MBA programs, we do lots of different things in education. But if we just focus on the online bit, we do 45 million online lesson minutes every quarter. When I think about that scale, it kind of floors me. And of course, we didn't get to that scale from day one. We have been teaching online for 25 years. This video you're seeing here is a bunch of products we built in the early 90s. And the video is really to celebrate 25 years of online education for EF. We were online teaching way before anybody else. And of course, because we were so early, those rewards of that growth of being online and doing stuff that other businesses weren't doing yet, they also came with a tax. We made really modern, state-of-the-art choices in the late 90s to bring us online. But today, those choices, they're not modern. There's no choice we would make today that 25 years from now would still be considered state-of-the-art for education, or for technology, rather. So we grew a lot, and we sat on this platform that aged over time. And being an incumbent, there's a risk of you sort of trying to protect the world that is making you successful rather than trying to innovate a new one. So Philip, our CEO, took a really brave decision 3 or 4 years ago to bring product development back out of the commercial teams and form a new team that we call EF EdTech that Tim and I work for. Now, EdTech's purpose was really to own product development and to restart R&D in EF and to bring us back into innovation mode. And we quickly saw the opportunity we had from EF's scale. But it was also reality that there was a lot of cleaning up and sort of getting our house in order before we could get into that innovation mode again. So we worked a lot, and AWS was an amazing partner here to bring a lot of our services from on-prem onto cloud. As we walked around the business, we could find green blinking LEDs in cupboards and servers whirring. Every team had stood up its own SQL server. Every team had stood up its own web server. And that kind of pace and iteration in the 90s, that was the way things were done. But of course, today, it wasn't right for us continuing to innovate. So we brought all of our compute online and in the cloud with EC2 and EKS and a few other of the things that AWS has on the shelf. And we brought all of our storage over with RDS, Aurora, Glue, AppFlow, and a few other things. And as we did that, it was very clear that we were actually sitting on a treasure chest, and we were sitting on a real opportunity to do something with all of that data that had sat in little data puddles and little data pools, but was now getting brought back together in a big data lake. And so we knew there was opportunities in making use of that data, building ML models on top of it, which we'll talk about later. But before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about EF's philosophy for teaching. You know, I said we had more than 50,000 employees for EF. Actually, more than half of them are teachers. We passionately believe in that meeting between a real teacher and a student. Nothing will keep your attention like meeting another person. Nothing will make you do your homework like meeting another person. Nothing will make you keep your appointments like meeting another person. But it is hard to scale to the size that EF operates at with thousands and thousands of teachers. And EF's superpower has really been operationalizing that meeting between teachers and students and do it profitably. You know, we believe in this relationship between teachers and students as a better way to learn. But it isn't just something we believe. There's actually clear science behind it. If you go online and look up something called Bloom's 2 Sigma problem, you'll see that when people just learn for themselves or in groups, their results in a standardized test will look roughly like this. They'll sort of fall like a bell curve. And as soon as you introduce individual mentoring into that relationship, the results shift 2 standard deviations to the right. Individual mentoring is key to how we acquire knowledge. It really works. And that philosophy has sort of guided EF's growth for 25 years. Online growth, I should say. But of course, like any other business around the world, we have seen a massive acceleration of some trends that were really ongoing and persistent, but for the last couple of years just took off. 3 years ago, when students were given a choice in the cities where we had brick and mortar schools, more than 70% of them chose to attend a physical school and see a teacher face to face. Just 3 years later, that number looks completely different. 80%, even when given a choice, prefer online learning. Of course, the pandemic has shifted and accelerated that trend, but that number is still growing. It's growing in markets where there's no longer a lockdown. Students' learning preferences have really dramatically changed to be online. And we have not been the only ones who've been responding to that change. Education industry as a whole, of course, has done that. And a lot of companies and teachings and institutions have stood up solutions that have really been a bunch of disparate components they've sort of glued together to get a working solution. And in places, frankly, it's been a little bit messy. Not necessarily because the solution is bad, but because fundamentally, we have been trying to build and rebuild what we knew from face-to-face teaching online. And the real question that we should actually ask ourselves is, how do you teach online? Not how do we recreate what we had face-to-face, but how do you make use of all the advantages that online can bring to you? So to talk about this, I'll hand you over to Tim for a sec.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're very focused on the moment when a teacher and a student come together and they do that online. But when we looked out at the sort of type of online classrooms that were out there, a lot of them just look like this, and it's kind of a grid of faces, and they're all looking forwards, and there's very little interaction. And for me, when I look at this image, it kind of conjures up the image of the sort of Victorian classroom of the past, where everyone's sitting in a grid and listen to the teacher, and that's kind of how it looks the same to me. And we know that modern classrooms are very different to this. They're a dynamic space that are built for collaboration, and the students are given the tools to find the solutions to the problems, and that's the best way to learn. And so that's what we want to try and build with our online classroom. And we've been iterating on an online classroom, over a number of years, and it is a very good online classroom. Like, this is where we ended up about a year ago, and It's very robust. It worked inside and outside of China. It's perfectly integrated with our scheduling system, and it's full of really impactful features. But all of those iterations that you saw we were making, they're kind of like taking small steps. They're kind of just improving the features that already exist there. But really, we knew that if we really wanted to take a leap forwards, we needed to completely reimagine how we do online lessons. So the reason we brought out this mess and we begged AWS to let us plug things in today was because I think the real way to understand it is to experience it. So I'm going to try and give you guys, an online demo. Let me just... Yes, perfect. So when our students arrive at the class, this is what they'd see. And our teachers have a setup a lot simpler than this. A lot of this is for the sort of vision mixing that's going on behind the scenes. But essentially, they have a laptop and they have a green screen. So a student, and everything that you'll see on the screens either side of us, this is exactly what our student sees. And so when the student comes to join a class, the teacher will trigger a class, and it looks like this. Oh. Let me just... Hello, my name's Tim. I'm your teacher today, and this is the sort of view that a student will get as they enter the classroom. And what you'll see is we don't have webcams and we don't have a slideshow and a notepad. We've blended everything together to put into focus whatever's most important in each moment of the class. So at the start of the class, the thing that's most important is us breaking the ice and me introducing myself. So that's kind of what the experience is, that's what the environment is. I'm British, I'm from London, I love skiing, and I can introduce myself like that. When it comes to the student to start talking about themselves, we'll move into the classroom. And it's a different environment. We want the focus to be less on me and to be more on you, and so there's an opportunity for you to speak. And we will keep sort of dynamically changing this environment depending on what we want to focus on in each moment of the class. So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about traveling to an event, a bit like we're all at today. And so, we can move through things, we can talk about the objectives of the class, but we can do things much richer than with a PowerPoint because these things are interactive. We can use video. Here are some of the things that we're going to learn about today, and I can reveal these when I'm ready. And then also we can use video, so maybe I want to pause a moment and I can drop in a pointer and say, what is it that they've got in their hand? We can start discussing, what is the language that they already know, and setting the context for what's happening in this class. But then it becomes really interesting when we move into more activities, because these are all very interactive activities. And so, here's a sort of sequencing activity, and if the student gets it wrong, then the teacher has an opportunity to show them what it looks like when it's wrong. So I think we all know this is nice to meet you. There we go. And so I can move these things around. We think of them much like sort of fridge magnets on the fridge, and it's like very interactive like that. And these things that you're seeing as we go through, they're an opportunity for us to sort of explain to the student what they should be doing in each moment of the class, but we don't always have to cram everything onto the screen at once. So we know that the answer is, here is my passport, but say if you were struggling, we can click down and give you some clues, and here are some different options, and maybe we can talk together about how some of these things will work. There's alternative ways that these things will work. So it's all about having this sort of whiteboard space to be able to sort of move things around and encourage language together. I'll look at some more examples. Maybe it's something like a matching activity. So if you're learning about ordering food, we would say it's a cup of coffee and a piece of chocolate cake. There we go. Again, we can do things like multiple choice. Here's a very attractive jumper direct from the event. What size is it? Probably would pick this answer, medium. So we have loads of great activities like this. And I'm showing from early sort of more beginner level things at the moment, but we go right up to advanced level, and you'll see some of those examples later. This is like a sorting exercise. I think where it becomes really interesting is when we actually start to use environments alongside the language that we're using. So in here, I can type in the language, and maybe, where you're from, it isn't cold and windy. Maybe it's more rainy, So this is interactive. It's like a post-it note, but I'm in an environment that kind of encourages, the language that you might use. Again, if we're talking about winter, maybe we move into more of a snowy environment. And so, this is just different ways that we can help set context, help sort of encourage the student to produce the language that we want them to produce. But I think really the opportunity that comes with having these virtual environments is in particular when we move into more role-play scenarios. So with language learning, the point of coming into these classes is to give you opportunities to use the language that you've learned and to do that in a very authentic way. So if we're going to talk about traveling to an event, well, the best place to do that is not in the, let me just do this, is not in the classroom, it would be go to the airport itself. So let's start a role play. So hello, welcome to the airport. Can I see your passport, please? So I'm here in the airport, and we can start practicing the language that you would use as you're checking into a flight. And I can use the environment to guide the conversation. So maybe I'd ask you about, would you rather have an aisle seat or a window seat? And you can look at the different options that we have there. And then at some point, we'll get to give you your boarding pass, and we'll talk about, which gate it is that you need to go from, and what time that you'll be leaving. And let's say you're doing really well. Well, actually, the teacher could use the environment to change the challenge level of the conversation as well. So maybe you're succeeding too well, so we might say, actually, I'm afraid there's been a delay to your flight, and so we'd move the conversation into a different direction, and you'd have to talk about potentially moving from a different gate or leaving at a different time. I'm just going to try one more time to make sure my speakers are working. Let's try this. So if the flight's delayed, let's move over to the welcome lounge. And now we can go and grab a coffee whilst you're waiting. And so you're going to order from me, and you can see some things on the menu here. And again, if you're struggling, maybe I can give you some clues by showing you pictures of what those words are. But again, we do this always in a very sort of authentic way, not breaking out of the role play scenario. And particularly if I was a teacher, if you were really struggling and you couldn't say anything, then really what I'd need to do is give you the model language for what you should say. But I don't want to break out of the character, so we can use the environment to do that in an interesting way as well. So if you really couldn't think of anything to say in this moment, I could say to you, I'll tell you what, whilst you have a think about it, I'll just serve this customer first. Oh, sorry. I'll just serve this customer first. Hi, what can I get you? Oh, okay, and anything else? Perfect, here you go. So there, I think you couldn't quite hear the audio there because it's not coming out of the system, but she was giving the model language, asking for the cup of tea and the slice of cake, and so it's a good way for me to give you an example of the language that you can use without breaking out of the role play. All right, let's keep our journey going then. So when the flight's ready to leave, we'll head over to the aeroplane. And so you can imagine talking to the other passengers that you meet along the way. Probably you bump into a bunch of people that are heading over to reInvent as well. And then when the flight lands, then maybe it's time to find your way to the convention center or head over to your hotel. And again, we can prompt the sort of language that you'll need to use by showing you the directions. You're going to talk to me. And then finally, we can head over to the hotel. And we'll welcome you at the check-in desk, and you'll show me your booking information. We'll talk about that, and finally we can kind of get you your key card. And because this is an event, not just going to the hotel, maybe we'll finish off by doing some networking and sharing some business cards and introducing yourselves to different people. So these are all ways that we can use the environment to kind of really prompt an authentic role play with the student and let them use the language and build confidence. And so I'm going to give you one more little scenario. Maybe if I was going to be teaching Bjorn to really nail his speech, we might start off with some practice activities. This is from a real lesson that we have, which is a more advanced level. So we're going to do some sorting here where you'd move things into different sections, whether you think they're for the introduction or the conclusion, things like that. And then maybe we'll go and plan out your speaker notes. And so we'd say, just do a great demo. And then at the end, we'll let you actually practice the speech itself. And here I am as the teacher in the audience saying, "You're doing a really great job, woo, woo, woo," and giving you a big round of applause. There you go. And so these are different ways that we can help you practice the language that you're learning in an authentic way and start building that muscle memory. And we can give you feedback, and we can also celebrate your wins. And one last thing I'd say is, talking of celebrating wins, we're very excited because this week, in fact on Wednesday this week, we've have been nominated as a finalist of the Alton Awards for Digital Innovation in learning, in teaching, I should say. So fingers crossed that on Wednesday we'll kind of get recognized for this work that we've been doing. So there's the classroom that we've been building. And let me just jump back over to the slides. Yes, I think it's that one. Perfect. The clicker is here. So so with Hyperclass, we're giving teachers tools so they can better guide the students' focus. They can really sort of adjust the challenge level, personalize the lesson, and they can also enable these sort of very authentic conversations to happen so they can really sort of build the confidence in the skills that they've been doing. And so we think it's a really great experience, but I think creating the experience is actually the easy part. The difficult bit is then bringing this out at scale to the thousands of teachers around the world, because it's not just learning a new technology, it's a new content, and in fact it's a new pedagogy, it's a new way of teaching, because it's using these tools and we really enable you to react more to what the student needs. But obviously there's a lot of work to do. But that is, again, one of EF's sort of super skills is rolling this out at scale. And this is one of our teacher centers over in Johannesburg. It's now sort of sea of green screens, and our teachers are using this and they're rolling out these lessons. And we're getting really amazing feedback, both on the engagement as well as the impact that it's having. And this is what our lessons look like now. So we're delivering thousands of these lessons, and as I think you'll agree, they look very different to the sort of online classrooms that we've been used to. They're very engaging, very dynamic. So we think with Hyperclass we're delivering really great learning experiences, but in actual fact, the learning experience is just half of what we offer as a product. The other half is how do we encourage students to make sure that they're studying the right things at the right time. And so to talk a bit more about that, I'll pass you back to Bjorn to introduce our platform.
Thanks very much. Okay, so remember we said 3 years ago we started this big effort to re-platform, get off our old platform and build a new platform. We've chosen to call that Effector. We really took a big step and a big bet at the time to build this platform fundamentally for online education. So, as I said, we still have a brick and mortar element, as lots of teaching businesses and institutions do. But we bet big that online teaching was going to be the way things were going, and of course that has proven to be the case. We also took a big bet that we would build it with EF being treated like a third-party customer. So in some ways, that's not too dissimilar to how AWS's journey has been for Amazon. Really, that platform was built to power the world's largest commerce website. But fundamentally, that also created a new set of opportunities for Amazon because that platform was suddenly available for others to use. And that's the journey we're on. We built this platform as well so that others could jump onto it and use it. And our purpose now is to turn EF from this great education company into also being a great and amazing platform and business provider. So our platform consists of 4 things. You've obviously seen Hyperclass, which we've spoken about. But the 3 others are our content system. We'll talk about that in a second. Our student portal and our teacher operations center. So our content system we built from the ground up. A lot of LMSs have and can integrate with existing content systems for self-study. We built ours, again, to be extremely data emissive so that, many content systems, when you interact with self-study lessons, you really only get a couple of data points out of it, which is Bjorn has started the lesson or Bjorn has finished the lesson. We track a lot of data inside of here because we think it's extremely valuable to know what happens in a self-study lesson for a student. So, how long does a student linger over a button before they press it? Which buttons did they choose wrong before they clicked the right one? Which button caused them, or which question caused them to stop inside of a lesson? All that data is extremely rich for us, and it's something that we shouldn't just lose. So we emit a bunch of data, and we inject it into this central data lake we have now. And then we marshal that and weaponize that data inside of our student portal and our teach operations systems. So the student portal is a set of sort of embeddable web components that really builds the school for students. So it is self-study, of course. It is booking your lessons, is seeing your feedback, all the things that a student needs to do to study. The flip side of that is our Teach Operations Center. So that consists of really a front end and a back end. On the front end, it's where our teachers mark and open their availability, get feedback from students, prepare for class, get feedback from Teach Operations as well. And on the back end, we have a sort of Uber-like real-time scheduling system that can match students and teachers based on the data we've collected about them and their preferences to make sure they have great meetings when they meet up. And although most of it is automated now, we also allow human overrides. So of course, at the scale we're operating at, tens of thousands of teachers, we sometimes come into situations where a human decision needs to be made. And so we have a teach operations team that can use the back end of this platform as well to say, actually, I don't want that teacher over here. I want that teacher to be operating over here. And then, of course, Hyperclass, which we've just demoed, so I'm not going to talk more about. Now, the system in its components is not that different to many LMSs that you can find around and purchase into. But we built ours to really be integrated and know about each other so that in our teacher prep page, we have data from the self-study. In our teach operations center, we have data about how the teachers are acting and reacting inside of classes. So we built it to be extremely data rich. And I spoke earlier about this huge opportunity we have with data that this platform has really enabled. So to speak more about that, I'll hand you back to Tim.
Yes, so the reason why we're so excited about it is, in fact, like capturing data in these sort of discrete environments like self-study is not uncommon. It's something that our competitors do. It's something that we do now with Catalyst. But the real nut that's not been cracked before, we think, is in that live learning moment. So that moment when the teacher and the student come together, that's what we care about so much. But capturing data from a live classroom has been very, very difficult. And it's difficult because it involves people, and as soon as you involve people, it doesn't matter how much structure and plan you have for a lesson, things can go off in lots of different directions, and we encourage it. We want our teachers to react to the needs of their students. But understanding what's happening can be very complicated. But fortunately, that's what we've been working on over the last year. And so over here on the left-hand side, you can see a video capture of a real lesson that happened a few weeks ago. And then on the right-hand side, you can see an automated class report that we've created that gives some understanding of what happened in that class. And I think of it very much like if you use a fitness app and you go for a run, then at the end of your run, you'll get to see the route that you took and how far it was, and maybe the pace per kilometer and a heart rate and an elevation, all of that information. And it does a couple of things. One, it helps you feel more productive. It makes you feel recognized for the efforts that you've put in. But two, it also offers you a lot of things that you can track, and you can see what effect you're having as you adjust your training. So that's exactly what we want to bring to education. So if you look at this automated class report that we've created, the first big thing that you see up there at the top is the talk time. And this is specifically how long the students spent speaking English, not their native language. And so for a class for us, the goal of it is about giving students opportunity to apply the language that they've learned. And so this gives us a very objective view on the sort of quality of that lesson, of the success of that lesson. And this was a 40-minute class, and so 23 minutes of production from the student is actually a really, really great class. And so a couple of the other data points you see underneath, we can tell you the total number of words that you said, how many of those were unique words, and this is something that is impossible for a human to do, a teacher to do during a class, is to recognize how many unique words were said. That would be impossible, but it's something that's very simple for a machine to do once we transcribe a lesson. And then working our way down, we have this sort of visualization of the class. And so all of these purple lines that you can see as we go from left to right, they are the moments that the student was producing English. And you can see across the top there, we have the different categories of content that were being done, the activities that were being done. So you can really see what it was the student was doing, what was causing them to produce the most language, how they were spending time during that class, which are all insights that were very hard for us to get in the past. We also offer a number of other data points, things like what was the longest monologue. So this is an unbroken sort of stretch of speech, or the average monologue. And this gives us indications of the level of fluency that they have. And then we also apply our speech scoring engine and give you like a pronunciation score. So this tells you, how well we understood the English and how recognizable it was as in English. And then we can pull out things like the number of difficult words that you use from a recognized list of difficult words. Or we could say how much of the target language for this class did the student produce. And maybe more importantly, how much did they not produce, and what do they need to still focus on after the class. And then down at the bottom, we still include that human input, the sort of written feedback from the teacher. But by producing all of the automated feedback now, it means that the teacher can really focus on not having to capture what happened, but just give that sort of human input back to the student. And so if you look at a number of these reports side by side, you can actually see a lot about what happened in a class without having to sort of sit down and watch a full 40-minute video. That's the only options that we had before were to kind of get the slightly subjective feedback from a teacher that they write about the class, which they have a limited amount of time to do, or sit and watch the entire video. But now you can see, you can picture what happened in these classes, and I watched all of these classes. Over there on the left, you can see that the student didn't produce as much. And in actual fact, if you look further down, they did use a lot of difficult words, but they just didn't speak very much. And that reflects what happened in the actual class, in the lesson that I watched. They had quite a good level of English, but they just weren't feeling super confident, and the teacher was doing a lot of work to encourage them to speak. So it means for the next teacher that might come along and teach that student, giving them insights into this, means that they can be more prepared to sort of give that student what they need. Over on the right, this lesson was really interesting because it was actually the student's first ever lesson, and they were a very, very beginner level student. And so it looks like they didn't, they weren't talking much. They were actually talking a lot throughout the class, but they kept falling back to their native language because they didn't have as much English to sort of use. But throughout the course of the lesson, they built up the language that they were going to use in those sort of main task scenarios. And then at the end of the class, they were producing quite a lot of English. So you can kind of see that the journey that they went on just sort of through that sort of visualization. And so it's giving us great insights that we've not had access to before. And there's a lot of sort of tech that's going on behind the scenes to make this possible. So we use audio signal processing, so we're transcribing everything that happens in the class, but we can do this really accurately because we own the entire classroom, so we get an individual mic feed from each student and the teacher, and so we can really accurately say who was speaking and when, and which parts of the transcription apply to that person. And then we also use computer vision, so we look at the whole class, which we've captured as a video feed end to end, and we can see how we can see exactly which scenes were being used, how the teacher was using the lesson, how they were using the different activities, and we can also scrape any text that the teacher has added on top of that. So they can add custom text, and they tend to add a lot of sort of scribbling like teachers do across the activities. And so together with all of that sort of audio transcription and then combined with the text transcription, we have a huge amount of data from the lesson. Now, of course, we're using AWS services to do this, the machine learning services, so we're using transcribe and recognition. And because we produce so much data from it, we actually use NLP, natural language processing, to summarize everything that we've captured from those transcriptions. So, for example, we'll ask the model what would be a good thing for the student to do after the class, and it will look through all of the transcription and find some, some of the transcription that would match that and answer that question well for us. So it really helps us summarize what's happened and navigate all of that data we're producing. And we've already done this, applied this to thousands and thousands of lessons, hyperclasses that we've taught. And now we start to get insights, looking at the trends and the sort of peer set that we've literally never had access to before. So, what is a good amount of talk time for a certain age or in a certain market? We can now see this, and we can see if a student was above average or below average. Our teachers will comment and they'll say, yeah, they were very chatty, or no, they were quite quiet. But now we can, very accurately and objectively see whether it was above average or less. And things like our confidence score, it's quite an abstract figure. So understanding how that actually applies and, being able to weight the quality of like a confidence score is something that's been hard for us to do, and it helps us improve our models. And then again, things like the number of unique words. It's hard to know, no matter how much experience you've had, if you've not been able to count that before, then it's hard to know what is a good amount for different levels. And so now we're starting to generate new information, new insights that I don't think anybody's been able to create before. So we're super excited about it because it means that for the first time we can start playing with all of these variables and objectively seeing what impact it has. We can start applying more science to our educational experiences rather than just relying on the expertise of our teachers. Now we combine the two. And so I come from a design background, and we would look at a website and we'd do things like play with a thumbnail and see if it resulted in more clicks. And now we can look at things like how we match a student and a teacher in our teacher operations portal, or what type of content we generate, and see exactly what the impact that has on the lessons and the amount of production, the amount of language production we get out of our classes. So every time our awesome data team, a few who are here today, produce these reports, we all sort of swarm over them, like sort of moths to a flame, because we get to understand so much about our products and our experience and about how students learn that we've not been able to do before. So I'm super excited about it. I think Bjorn is too, so I'll hand you back to him to sort of wrap things up.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited about it. I think the way students learn and the way teachers teach, we can fundamentally have that undergo a revolution if we grab and seize the opportunity that the move to online learning and teaching has given us. Instead of seeing it as a fallback for our inability to get together physically, we could actually see it as an opportunity. Now we have a camera pointing at every face. We have a mic recording every student and every teacher interaction. There's a lot of stuff that we can do when we suddenly have this data available to us that we've simply never been able to do in a classroom. And we are excited about that opportunity, and we think we can genuinely advance how humans can learn and teach. And I think that is super exciting. Now, we obviously wanted to come and share this with you today. We are building this, and we've spoken about it as an opportunity, but we actually see it as an obligation. There's not many places in the world that has a direct relationship with tens of thousands of teachers whose behavior we can affect, or millions and millions of students, and all their interactions with the self-study and the content systems. We are collecting data at a scale that I think, at a rate that probably can't be collected anywhere else. And we can turn it into something that could genuinely make an improvement to how we learn. That feels like an obligation because it's one of the few places we can do it. So I'm also excited about it because our platform is suddenly and finally at a place where we can start thinking about how this could apply to others. We are now starting to look for a few select, maybe one or two or three innovation partners who can see a platform like this make sense for their business. We are not the only place in the world where we need to teach a lot of people. There is certification and compliance requirements out in the world, big universities, companies that need to teach their own employees. We think there's opportunities for these, and we would love to work with some of them. So if you are excited about this, as excited as we are, please point your phone to the left QR code. You'll see a bit more information about. Love to start a relationship with you. Tim and I are going to be here all week. We're going to be here after the talk, of course. Come and chat to us, grab us, sign up with us on LinkedIn, and figure out if this might be valuable to you and your business, because it certainly is valuable to us, and we think we can do amazing things, not just for us and for you, but for humanity as a whole. And that's a pretty cool place to be. So thank you for that. I'll hand you back to Cameron for an outro.
Bjorn, Tim, thank you so much. Amazing presentation, amazing demo. I mean, the technology here is incredible. And as you said at the end, I think the applications are endless. I'm thinking about training, certifications, corporate, government, healthcare. I mean, endless applications. So thanks again, a really inspiring presentation. We do have time for some questions. So if there's any questions, just go ahead and shout it out. I'll repeat it so that we can make sure it's heard online. Go ahead.
First of all, do you have like kind of real-time closed captioning for accessibility reasons?
We've been using the technology, but we've not rolled it out yet because we're kind of like looking at the stability of it. Yeah. But it's, that's absolutely one of the first things that we, were experimenting with when we started looking at using Hyperclass, was the fact that we could actually, do that live. And, we were looking at it as a way of input as well.
What was the question, Tim?
The question was, for accessibility,
Yep.
could we create closed captions
Yep.
during this? So the technology is there and it's active, but it's like, because we're teaching language, any sort of, inconsistencies with the sort of language that ends up on screen. We always want to show really accurate, English on screen. So, it's a sort of, it's a balance that we're still playing with on that, yeah.
One more question.
Yes.
For students who need to learn by doing it themselves and they want to feel engaged, if they get a green screen, will that show, like you showed me, you as a teacher,
Yeah.
What was the question, Tim?
So the question was, Bjorn, what about students? Like, do we foresee students being able to be involved in the same way? And so absolutely, like that's where the ambition is. I think there's other technologies, beyond green screens with like segmentation that would make it a lot easier to do that. At the moment, the experiences that we've focused on have been around the private class, where it's with a teacher and a student. For group lessons, we're kind of looking more like less into these sort of presentation experiences and more into how to encourage students to interact more, sort of project-based activities. And so we kind of think that it's the blend of presentation and communication that kind of creates different experiences. So for sure, we'd love the student to be able to sort of join us in there, but at the moment, it's kind of like quite a focused experience that we're creating. The technology's there to do more, for sure.
Yeah, just to add to that, Tim, I think we know that the best way for many students to learn is actually to participate in these kind of role-playing sessions themselves. One person takes the role of a kiosk attendant, the other person takes the role of someone who's asking a question. And I think the next step for us is really extending this technology, so we do some of that auto-editing, maybe based on voices picking up, etc., so we can kind of present a live feed out to everyone else, and the people that are taking the roles get to see their view on it. So there's a lot of unexplored territory in kind of these role-playing scenarios online, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Over there?
So I think the question is about commercial applications other than language learning. So obviously at EF, we do a lot of language training, but we also teach other subjects. And this platform is not built around language learning as like the sole thing. One of the reasons we focused so much, and Tim's slide with the graphs talked about this, the peer set, is that we don't want to get into a situation where we really have to understand the topic in depth to be able to create automated feedback from it. So your role in relation to the peer group you're in, how much you're speaking, which words you say, etc., is kind of topic agnostic. So we definitely see the platform as not just being language training, but to be any form of training, any training in any way.
Actually, the question wasn't about non-language.
Okay.
It was about the audience, whether it was just focused on schools or consumers.
Things like individuals, I guess. Question like whether individuals can get the learning as opposed to in a classroom environment.
Yeah, so right now, when I spoke about us wanting to work with some innovation partners, businesses, our view is definitely on the scale play, because I think some of the things that the platform does really well is marshalling tens of thousands, or at least thousands of teachers, where you really start having scheduling needs. Undoubtedly, there's a second market you could attack, which is around monetization of, say, influencers or YouTubers who may at the present move on to platforms like Teachable, where they monetize their content over there. We think there are opportunities for that individually, but that's not where we're focusing at the minute, because we think we're bringing less special sauce in that area, because the challenges we're trying to solve is one of scale, really, operationalizing these systems at scale. So the tools could be used that way. It's not where we're focusing right now.
Time for a few more in the back there.
Oh.
Hey, how do you guys think about, it looks like you're a global company. How do you guys think about like where the data is stored? Like, is data from European schools stored in like European availability zones and Chinese schools and like Chinese areas?
Yeah, just like any other business at global scale, we have to be extremely cognizant of local regulation. You've got GDPR and obviously in Europe, and you've got very similar CSL regulations in China where we operate. And so we have to comply with those, and we do. It can get complicated sometimes in terms of processing the data and where does it sit at rest, etc. But broadly, we are not broadly, we are extremely compliant. And broadly, we try and keep track of latest regulations as well. So we kind of have to do it, especially on the enterprise side. We do a lot of deals at that enterprise size with teaching English. And the first question we get asked, certainly in Europe, is, hey, tell us about your GDPR compliance. And so we are extremely compliant. We have to be. I think there was a question over here as well. I saw a hand. Yo.
Kind of similar to his.
Yeah.
I'm just curious on some of the other security challenges as far as PII and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you make sure it doesn't get into hands of other people.
Yeah. So the question was about PII and how we make sure data doesn't fall into the wrong hands there. There's sort of a theoretical answer to your question, and then there's a very personal answer to your question. I want to sleep at night, right? And the way you get to sleep at night is that you do the right thing. And so we have we obviously could go in and at the lowest level, you can get access to any data you want. But we have built a set of requirements on top and policies that make sure that the right people access it. So, for example, student recordings, right? It's in an education context, you accept, or at least you probably accept that, hey, I'm going to get recorded and it's to provide feedback for me and it's valuable. And you expect the teacher that you had an engagement with to have access to that because they have got to give feedback. But you don't expect other teachers to get access to it. And so we have built our systems to make sure there's the right firewalls between the data and it's only the right people that can get access to it. Again, it's very similar to GDPR. We want to be compliant, but I think just as important for us is we want to sleep at night. Yeah. Yo. Yeah, so the question is about how do we lay these 4 components of our platform out, and in what order did they get built? Did they get built together or one by one? We started with teacher scheduling. The teacher scheduling systems we had were tricky to iterate on at this point, and they were very tied in with our old platform. And so and crucially, they were not real time. And that meant that a lot of the things that sort of seem natural to you, well, if a teacher cancels, another teacher should pick that up automatically or be reassigned. That stuff wasn't natural in our old platform. So that was the case, or the place where we had the biggest set of challenges, so that's what we solved first. Then we built Hyperclass and our content system Catalyst at the same time. So that's being deployed now, and then right now we're in the middle of building our student portal and our experience out there. We have all the components, because those web components we embed in our own school apps that we deploy when we teach people English. those web components are loose and can get recomposed. But the next step for us is just building the wrapper around that so we can roll it out to to any other client. So it's more of a gluing together job than it is a building job. Yeah.
I would add to it as well that the other element to like why we've chosen to build it in the way that we've chosen to build it is because EF has been doing education since 1965, like has a super deep understanding, and we have educators and academics as part of our core teams. So really we've built this fundamentally with a really solid understanding of what has impact and what are the tools that you need directly for education. So we had the sort of vision of that to start with, and we've just kind of been building it up in the right order for the context of where we started.
Yeah, but I think certainly when we started off 4 years, when I spoke about like, hey, we started to survey the landscape, I think we had the vision certainly of those 4 things of what we need to build to deploy a new white label teaching platform. I think that vision was there from the get-go. But like any business, you have to build where the need is greatest first. And so there was definitely an order to things, and still will be. Yeah, for sure.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, if anybody has.
There's one down here, Cameron.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if I missed it, but do you have a way of thinking of teachers improving themselves and scaling that? Teachers on the whole, or the private?
Yeah, so a big part of the
Question, Tim?
the question is how do we I get so excited about this conversation.
There's got to be a tool for that.
Yeah.
The question is what part of the product helps the teachers grow and support how they teach, right? Yeah, so the teacher operations product that we showed, I think in the description we focused a lot on the back end and how we do the matching and that sort of part. But the front end of that experience is focused on a couple of things. One is like reducing the amount of admin that a teacher has to do, so they can focus on teaching, and then 2, giving them the tools to be able to teach in a better way. So part of that is delivering them the right information at the right time about the student, so they can make those learning experiences more bespoke. But also, we help them manage their business. So, not really just on the way that they grow, but in just of, managing their invoices and, seeing how much time that they're spending and when they're sort of most effective. And then we also have training on there, so help and support. We have a big teacher operations team, and they're creating a lot of training content, and like we said, like one of the big challenges that we have with rolling out these new classroom tools is making sure everybody, is both understands but was also enthusiastic about jumping on these new tools, and we deliver that through our sort of teaching side. So there is a whole load more information we could give you about every single one of those products, which you'll find a bit more of on that site. But that is a big focus, is how do we call it like turning our teachers into super teachers. And the elements of that is giving you a career path, a way of growing past, just being able to deliver these 40 lessons, but where do I go from there? And all of that is encompassed in that product.
Maybe just final comment from me, both of you. Thanks again. I think you're starting from this basis of language learning, but the technology you've built is so powerful that I can envision endless applications across training and compliance and education. So I know you'd be really interested in, if anybody in the audience has either your own organization or one of your customers would be applicable for some of this. I know you'd be welcome to.
We'd love to talk to you.
To talk to them. So please talk to Tim and Bjorn afterwards if you're interested. But let me thank you guys again for an amazing presentation.
Thank you, guys.